Hello and welcome to a romantic rendezvous lockdown Ask Me Anything session with Australian's romance megastar Rachael Johns. My name is Laura Boone and I'm a big fan of Rachael's, both the author and the person, so I'm super excited to be hosting this session. Welcome, Rachael.
Oh, thank you, Laura. Wonderful introduction. Thank you.
Nothing that isn't true. Just a reminder to all our viewers that Rachael is taking part in our treasure hunt, so to be sure to keep watching until the end of the interview to get her code. Before we begin, I'll just give a brief overview of Rachael's life and career to date. She's an English teacher by trade, a mum 24/7, a chronic arachnophobe, a Diet Coke addict, a podcast junkie, and a writer for the rest of the time. She rarely sleeps and never irons. A lover of romance and women's fiction, Rachael loves nothing more than sitting in bed with her laptop and electric blanket and imagining her own stories. She is the author of 25 books, maybe a few more that I don't know about. Her awards include twice winning Favourite Australian Contemporary Romance from ARRA, in 2012 for Jilted and 2015 for the Patterson Girls. She was voted in the top 10 of Booktopia's Favourite Australian Author poll in 2013, and in 2016 the Patterson Girls was also named ARRBA General Fiction Book of the Year. Rachael lives in Perth with her hyperactive husband, 3 mostly gorgeous heroes in training, 2 ginger cats, a cantankerous bird, and a very badly behaved dog. Rachael, our first question comes from Malvina Yock, and she says that it's lovely to see you writing series romance as well as longer books. Do you have a preference? Which do you prefer?
Well, I often get asked, do I have a preference between the rural romance and the women's fiction? And I guess it's the same, rural romance, women's fiction, or series romance, in that whatever I'm not doing at the time, that is my preference. I think that would be so much easier to be doing. But when I'm actually doing whatever I'm doing, then like I say, at the moment, I'm writing a women's fiction with very strong romantic elements. And I think, I'd quite like to write a special edition or a rural romance. That would be much easier than having to navigate multiple women's point of views. So yeah, it's a bit of the grass is always greener. They all have their different challenges. I tried to write series romance or category romance first before I got published in a longer format, and it's super hard. Everyone was like, "Oh, you're writing a Mills and Boon? How that isn't that just a formula? It's so easy." But it's so not. And I actually sometimes feel like the shorter formats are harder because you really have to make sure that every word counts, and that the focus is so much on the hero and heroine. They've got to, whereas with the longer format books, I can throw in other quirky characters and things going on that they can carry the plot for a while if I need them to.
So I agree with you that whatever you're writing at the time seems the hardest. My first book was a contemporary romance because I was sure that would be easier than historical, and really that was just hilarious, that belief. So
actually, yeah, I have to say something on that, because I always kind of joke at author events and things like that. I actually think writing contemporary, as we've said, nothing is easy. I couldn't write a historical because I'd be too stressed about getting what they were wearing wrong, or what was happening time wrong, or how they spoke anything wrong. So same as you, I think, I thought contemporary was easier. The problem is we deal with things like laws, medical advances, social media, the fact that a lot of stuff that was taboo years ago, like having a baby before marriage, having sex before marriage, being gay, what else? Like just the whole load of things that were taboo, and that was it could be someone's deep and dark secret back then. Now they're pretty much all accepted by the majority of people. So that's one thing. It's hard to find sort of secrets that are actually going to be, big secrets that are actually going to affect everyone's lives. And the other thing I've found a lot is, I want someone, this sounds awful, but writers will understand. I want someone to die within a specific amount of time, and I need the disease they've got to have this, this, and this. But then when I talk to a doctor, they're like, oh no, they're just go on dialysis for a while. and I'm like, no. So, all these things that we, have now that are great in reality, they can cause problems to the plot. So I think, contemporary authors, we have our own hurdles to jump.
Definitely challenges. Then another question from Malvina, but I think we'll come back to it right at the end. I'll just mention it now. She wants to know what's next for you, but we'll get to that down the track.
I'm wearing earrings that give you a clue. So.
Those are fabulous. I did notice them. Our next question is from Carla Caruso. She wants to know how long you write for every day and how many days a week.
Well, in theory, I do try and write school hours pretty much only. I faff around. I've got kind of a process I have about half an hour to an hour of faffing around, which involves checking my email, answering emails and stuff. I know plenty of writers say they dive straight into writing and get other stuff out of the way later. Unfortunately, I feel like I need to get that out of the way, and it kind of just gets me into the day. So I get all that sort of stuff out the way. I'll check Facebook and all that. Do some online window shopping, check the rankings on Amazon, like we do all that kind of stuff. And that takes far too long. I'm a big procrastinator. And then I sort of get in the zone for a while. I used to read my whole manuscript pretty much every day before I started, which is I do not recommend it at all, especially when you're a slow reader like me. So I'd skim read kind of thing, and I'd pick things up, fix things here and there as I was going. But sometimes it could be like 2-3 hours to do that. And then it's like, oh, it's almost, the end of the day and I haven't actually written any words. So I'm trying to stop that now. But I do kind of do what I call getting in the zone for about half an hour after my faffing. So my faffing, then my getting in the zone, and that involves like reading back over the last chapter or so and tweaking things about that. And then I probably write pretty solidly, I'd say, from 9 or 10 o'clock to about 1 o'clock. And at the moment, I'm aiming for a word count because I've got quite a tight deadline. I do usually aim for about 10,000 words a week. Doesn't always happen. And so at the moment, I'll be writing all this weekend. I don't like that. But so, yeah, I try to keep to business, to school hours, but it doesn't always work that way.
Yeah. And she also wants to know if your insomnia has improved.
I would, if you asked me a couple of weeks ago, I would have said yes. I had a really bad insomnia for a few years. I don't know if it was to do with, little kids that didn't sleep, and then I just got in the habit of not sleeping. And I know a lot of writers who don't sleep very well. I think it's very hard for our minds to switch off. I'll often be lying in bed. And what's really annoying is people will be talking to me in my head as these characters, but they're never the characters I'm writing about. They're just random people. Like, it would be actually useful if my characters were talking about what they were going to do the next day or whatever, but they're not. Just random people talking in my head, lines that I'll probably never use. Okay, so, but I don't even know why, but a couple of years ago, I started sleeping a bit better again. The last few weeks, it's been not so great. And I think a lot of insomnia does come from the subconscious, if you're stressed about other things that are going on. So because I'm stressed about the current book and what I've got to write quickly, then I think probably I'm not sleeping that well again. But yes, in general, yes. Thank you, Carla.
Well, that's good to know. And stress definitely does play a role in insomnia. Then, okay, we have a couple of questions from Jeannie Green. Her first question is, how do you find time to write, given you're such a busy lady? I guess you're not quite as busy now as you were
a few years back, yeah.
A few years back, yes.
So yeah, like I think there's probably two parts to this question, in that now I write as a full-time job. I don't have anything else that's going on, whereas we used to have a supermarket, and I had 3 young kids when I first got published. When I first got published, one was still at home. And so, that was a lot harder to find the time. And I think the way you do it is through support. Basically, I had people who said, you know, I'll take care of the kids for a couple of hours while you can do it. I wrote at night rather than watching TV, you know, and I was lucky then because my kids went to bed early. So, you know, they'd be in bed by 6:30, 7 o'clock. I still had another few hours at night where I could write. Whereas now I'm too tired by the time they go to bed. But the flip side of that is that now they're away all day. So that's how I fit it in. So in some ways, I don't feel like what I do is any different to anybody else who goes out to work, you know, a full-time job and then has a family as well. So yeah, it's a lot easier now, I suppose, in terms of fitting stuff in. And I'm by all means, no, not perfect. Like you should see, my husband works full-time, I work full-time. Our house is by, you know, never spotless. We try, but we have a big, massive dog and 3 kids, 2 cats, you know, like, that's what suffers often. My priorities are my kids and my writing, and those 2 things I try not to let suffer. And I should say my family rather than just kids, I suppose. But yeah, so it's a matter of just before you're published, I think it's a matter of just finding the time, and it can be hard. I was never one of those people, like people would say, oh, get up at 5 a.m, you know, and get a couple of hours in before everyone wakes up. Well, A, I'm a terrible morning person, and B, my kids are all morning people, and so they would get up at 5 a.m. So if I got up, you know, earlier, it would be like 3 a.m, and that was not going to happen. So I think now it's a matter of treating it like a job, but I understand that not everyone can do that, and so, you know, I am in a privileged position there, I suppose. Yeah.
Well, I guess it's that thing about you find the time somehow if you really want to do it.
Yes, I remember actually when I was first published, and I had, as I said, we had our own business in the country. I had 3 little kids, and I do a couple of author talks here and there, and people come up to me and go, oh, I really, really want a book, but I just can't. I've got 3 kids and we own our own business. And I'm thinking, yeah, you just described my life. But of course you didn't say that. I probably should have said that maybe, but yeah.
Well, no, it's always good to be kind. So Jeannie also wants to know if you're a plotter or a pantser or some kind of mix of the 2.
Well, I often wish I was a plotter. I actually say, recently I realised a couple of years ago, actually, so not that recent, that I'm a prayer. Okay? So there's plotters, there's pantsers, I'm a prayer. I pray somehow it will work out, and that, you know, I'll know what's going to happen. And so that's a bit true, but also I'd say I think everyone's on the spectrum somewhere between plotting and pantsing. I'm sure most of our readers know what I mean by that. So plotting, you kind of know what's going to happen. You might write a big outline beforehand. Some people are very detailed in terms of chapter by chapter, scene by scene. Other people just have a general overview. I love the idea of that because I think it would be much easier, and I wouldn't write 80,000 words and then go, oh my gosh, I have no idea how this is going to end, which is invariably how my writing process is. But I wouldn't say I'm a complete pantser, and I don't think anyone probably is, in that you sit down and you just completely start and don't know what you're doing. I mean, I think a lot about characters before I start. I do generally have a vague, you know, premise. For example, I think the last book that I wrote, so the last book that was published was Something to Talk About, and that's a rural romance. I already had the main female character in my head from a previous book, so I thought a lot about her and what her issue was, and then I kind of worked out, well, who do I want to pair with her? I didn't actually know what was going to happen throughout the book, and I wish I did, because it probably make things easier. I had a bit of an idea that I wanted to do a fake relationship trope, but it didn't quite work out that way. So I have sort of a general idea of where I want something to go. I like it if I know kind of what the black moment or the big dark sort of dramatic part at the end will be, but I don't always. So I do a lot of character work, and when I say a lot of character work, not that I write down lots of outlines or things like that. I think a lot about the characters. I often also think about archetypes. I've got a great book, I think it's within reach, called The Heroes and Heroines. It's a complete writer's guide to heroes and heroines, 16 master archetypes. And once I've got an idea kind of for a character in my head, I will then go through and try and work out where they might fit. So for heroines, there's like librarian, girl next, I don't know if it's going to free spirit, you know, there's a spunky kid, there's the boss, and they all have different sort of personalities and maybe backgrounds and things that have shaped them. And I find that really helps me consolidate the characters in my head. And so I'll do a lot of that sort of thinking, but then basically I get bored and I just want to start. So I will sometimes, like if I have to write a synopsis or a blurb for my publisher, I don't always have to do that depending on where we're at in the contract or various things. I'm lucky that I know my publisher quite well now, so I'll write like a bit of an outline. I generally get to about 3/4 of the way through or even earlier, and I say, and something bad will happen, and because I really have no idea. So yeah, that's a long-winded answer, sorry.
No, I always think that a synopsis or blurb, it's a funny thing because ideally you would do it at the end of the book, once you've worked it all out, but usually you have to do it before you start, which is...
Yeah, and I think, if you can, it's a very useful tool. Because, you can refer back to it when you're stuck. And I know many people, actually start with a blurb and then go a bit further, so it really depends on how you work. But I find, it's often easier to write a synopsis after I've actually finished writing the book.
Now she asks if you worry about your plot line or character traits leading from one book into another.
So do I think about the next book while I'm writing, or is it a series?
Yeah, I think she's asking if you worry, which I would say from reading your books you don't, but if you worry about having the same plot line in like 2 different books or 2 characters who are very similar.
I think that's a worry the more you write, because obviously, I find ideas came to me a lot easier when I first started to write. And what would happen is I'd be writing a book, and invariably halfway through writing, I'd get this wonderful, brilliant idea. I thought it was brilliant because it was so much better than the book I was writing currently. But at least I would force myself not to pursue it, maybe write a few notes, but at least I would know what I was writing next. Whereas now, it's a lot more sometimes about manufacturing ideas because I know that I've got a contract, I've got to write a specific type of book. And I do think a little bit about that, like trying to think of an example recently where I've thought, oh no, I shouldn't do that. Or sometimes I will have an idea, like for my next book, there's a little that I'm going to be writing soon, or not. There's a bit of a domestic violence element. And yeah, the book that I was currently writing could have lent itself that way, but I was like, no, that's for the next book, so you don't want to explore too many. But I think with romance, with women's fiction, there's a lot of the varieties in the voice and the characters, because the storylines, there's nothing new. Everyday crime as well, really, I suppose. I do, so I try to do things, mix things up a little bit, but it's something that you're aware of. But then I think also the fact that each character, to me, characters are very strong, and the characters make the story different, even if the plot maybe have something similar in it, if that makes sense. I'm not sure I answered that question very well.
No, you did really well. Now I have a question about your move into women's fiction or life lits. So do you what appeals to you about each of the different genres? So romance on the one hand and life lit on the other.
Well, I like romance, I think, for a number of different reasons. So there's 2. I like rural romance because I really like, and small town romance, I suppose, because I really like the small town community aspect. I've lived it myself. I love the fact that you can really play with the fact when the sort of the idea or the reality that everyone thinks they know everything about everybody else. Everyone's related. So I really, and small towns really come together in a crisis. They help in each other, and it's a really lovely sort of arena to write in. But it can also be a horrible thing if you just come into a small town and you've never lived in one, you're the outsider. So there's lots to play with there, and I love the community aspect of my small town rural romances. I love reading romance because it's feel good, and it's escapism. If your real life hero is annoying you, well, you can pretend that you're in the book. And And so, I mean, I that's what I love about romance. I think that it's feel good. It makes you happy. Everyone's like, or not everyone, but a lot of people are like, oh, but you know what's going to happen. But if you've got a really good writer, they take you on a journey, and it doesn't matter that eventually, because you just fall in love with those characters. You want to be the heroine. You love the hero. So I enjoy sort of those. I love the banter, I suppose, in romance. I love writing two characters, especially. It doesn't always work this way, depending on the plot, but I love it when the characters kind of have a bit of tension and don't necessarily like each other at the start, and they can really have some really fun banter between them. I love writing that when it works well. So I like the sexual tension. I don't mind writing sex scenes either. So I kind of enjoy that part of romance. With women's fiction, well, it's kind of like I've always read those stories. I sort of, before I even found romance properly, I was reading chick lit books it was called chick lit at the time. I think Bridget Starr, Marianne Keyes, Kathy Kelly, those books that explored, a woman's journey and the issues that are going on in a woman's life. And so, I like that aspect of that. I like the relationships that not necessarily romance, but, relationships between sisters or friends that can be really complicated. So I think, I like now I've forgotten what the question was. We saying,
but what do you like about each genre?
I think also, as well as that, I'd say I like writing romance because when I come back to romance, I feel very safe, and I know I've got a structure. Even if the characters are different, the story is different, I know that I have to hit certain notes in romance. Whereas with women's fiction, it can be different for each book, that structure. I think it's different, even like, say if you're writing a crime, you're going to follow something bad's going to, there's either going to be a murder or someone's going missing, and then we've got to find out by the end who. Whereas with women's fiction, each one of mine has been structured slightly differently. Some have 4 point of views, some have all female, a couple have male in as well. Some have 3, some have only 1, and it really depends on the story. So each book kind of feels like you're starting again. Whereas when I write romance, although I'm not saying it's easier, as I said, there's other issues, but at least I know that I'm following a certain kind of structure, if that makes sense.
And do you feel that the two different genres, do you feel there's a lot of overlap in your readers, or do you think that they each appeal to different readers?
Really, that's a really interesting question. And I feel like romance readers are more proactive in terms of interacting with authors, following authors online, posting reviews. This is just my gut feeling. Whereas I feel like the ones who purely read in, say, the women's fiction genre, they're not necessarily the type of people that interact with authors online and follow, some of them might be, but I feel like, so whenever I put the question out, and I have a couple of times put this question out to my readers and said, which books of mine do you prefer? Do you like the rural romance or the women's fiction? The overwhelming majority say the rural romance, but I don't know if that's because that's what's more popular, or if it's because, and I would say it's not what's more popular, because to be honest, my sales are a little bit higher in the women's fiction, whereas in rural romance, it's interesting. With rural romance, the books often sell faster in the beginning, but I think it just shows exactly what romance readers are like. Romance readers are die-hard readers who love their books and read a lot. So they'll go out and buy an author the minute a new book that they love, of an author that comes out. Whereas the people who read but the people who read only women's fiction, they might not rush out and buy the book. I feel like, they'll buy the book when they're ready to read another book, or if they happen to be browsing. Whereas romance readers are the best. They're voracious and they're devoted. And so, I think that's the kind of difference. Definitely there's a crossover, but there are definitely people also that only read my rural romance books, and then there's others who will not read the rural romance. The funny thing is, I think there's people who don't read the rural romance because, they don't read romance type books or whatever. But then when they decide, I'll just try one, they'll usually get hooked on those as well. So, I think there's still that stigma about romance, which is just ridiculous. And people are quite often surprised when they enjoy it.
And I think there's a lot of people who don't read romance actually have, I don't know what they expect exactly, but they have really weird perceptions about it, that if they actually read a romance, then they're like, oh yeah, I quite like that. It's got a real story and real characters. And
I must admit, I actually was like that myself, because, you know, a lot of people who read romance or write romance, they grew up, you know, stealing Mills and Boon or other type of romance books from their mums or their grandmothers. And now I didn't have that. And for some strange reason, I had this idea that Mills and Boon books especially were just, you know, absolute trash, heaving bosoms and throbbing manhoods. I have no idea where that came from. Like, it's just this thing that seems to be, you just believe if you don't know any better. And so I was one of those people too, and I'm really glad that I saw the light and, you know, but I must admit, you know, when I first started writing, I tried for years to sort of write what I call a weird combination of literary chick lit, which is not a thing, because I really wanted to be writing feel-good fun fiction, but I did a uni degree in writing, and they wanted me to write the Pulitzer Prize. Never going to happen. And so I had this, maybe that's where it came from, I don't know, maybe that's where my perceptions came from, because I was thinking that only, you know, a certain type of fiction was, you know, what's where I can't even think, but, and so then when I decided, you know what, I'm not getting anywhere with this, Brenda and I decided, let's write a Mills and Boon book. We'd never read one. It was a bit of a joke, I admit, but it was the best thing I ever did, and it changed my perception about romance and Mills and Boon. And then when I tried, because I read 50 in a month and I really loved them, and I realised, oh, this is not what I imagined. It was like any book you read, you know, some I loved more than others, some I was like, but that's whatever genre you read, you know, you're not going to love everything. And so when I did that, and then it opened my eyes up to a whole new type of writing, and I decided I was going to try it. Everyone thought, oh, that's really easy. I even thought, oh, this should be easier than writing, you know, literary fiction, and it was not easier. And so I think, yeah, I don't know where that misconception comes from. It's definitely out there. Maybe because it was like it's one of the best-selling genres in the world, and it's like a tall poppy thing or whatever. You know, we always want to put down I don't know. It's weird, but I'm glad that I found the light. I saw the light and found the truth, and I hope that, you know, through my rural romance fiction, and I think this is the case in Australia. You know, romance, that it was hard to find romance books apart from Mills and Boons, like on the shelf of Kmart, Big W. Many bookshops, you know, didn't necessarily support romance, and the Australian publishers certainly, and you know, until the last probably 5 or 6 years, didn't really publish romance and didn't hold it in any kind of regard. But I think rural romance has done something for Australian literature, and it's opened romance a little bit more up into the wider, and people have picked that up, not really realizing what they were picking up necessarily, and then they've fallen in love with romance. I have many of people who email me and say, you know, the first romance they ever read was one of my rural romances, but now they love romance. So yeah,
I think that's true, and it goes to show what happens when the bookshops open up and, you know, books are more widely available.
Yes.
I was just listening to a podcast, which is something I want to come back to you about just now. And the author who was talking, Sarah McLean, was saying that she went to the UK for a book launch.
Yep.
And she said she doesn't know where UK readers get their books from, because it's not from bookshops, because she spent 2 weeks looking for her books in bookshops and she didn't find a single one, not hers or anybody else's.
Wow.
So I think Australia's now, you know, somewhere in the middle. We're not quite as open as the Americans.
Yeah,
we're more open than the UK.
No, I don't quite there, and maybe it's a matter of the number. Like, you know, America's got a huge population, so you can have specialist romance bookshops. I know Australia had a few, and most of them I think have sadly, you know, closed. But I don't think we're quite there. Like, but it's also not necessarily because of the genre, but because of the fact that our shelves can only fit a certain amount of books on. And in the last few years, you know, as I said, Australian publishers are printing a lot more local voices. Therefore, local voices are taking room on the shelf that previously maybe would have been available to, I mean, not completely, you've still got all the big names like, you know, Danielle Steele and Nora Roberts, and they're there. And I think it possibly was never easy to get, you know, a lot of romance. And it's still hard. So I guess that's where online, you know, I think romance readers do read a lot and buy a lot online. But I just do think that Australian publishers are being sort of more inclusive towards romance in the last few years than they were. Like when I first joined Romance Writers of Australia, it was 2006. The only publishers that came to our conference were Harlequin. And Harlequin Australia wasn't even a publisher then. Like it was just a distribution office for overseas books, and now that's changed. But over the next few years, when I started to, you know, go to conferences and stuff, slowly, and I think it was with Bron Parry, she published her romantic suspense with Hashtag, and then they came to the conference, and then, you know, the word sort of slowly got out there. And now, you know, all the mainstream publishers come and are open to romance a little bit more. I remember when I first was submitting my first rural romance, Jilted, which was eventually picked up by Harlequin. I actually got rejections from every other publisher in Australia. They were good ones. They were not like, this is terrible anymore. My rejections had changed. But I remember Penguins was just like, look, we'd really love to publish this, but it's just, there's too much romance for it. It's just not quite, right for the Australian market. So I think they've changed their tune. They publish more rural romance and things now. But yeah, it is positive, I think, in that Australian publishers are opening to more romance and more local voices. But yeah, it's still hard to get romance books in your mainstream bookshops and stuff.
Yeah.
They're big names, or, you know, like E.L. James or Nora Roberts. You know, those are there. Yeah.
And yeah, I think that there is a lot more support these days, and especially for rural romance, because it has such a lovely Australian setting.
Yeah.
So, and I even know a few men who like to read those stories.
Definitely, and that's why I have a little bit of a actually I got an email. I think I deleted it. So but I woke up to an email this morning from a male. I'm just going to see if I can actually find it still. It's in my from a male who said, here we go, I've got it. I will not read his name, but I'm guessing he's got a daughter who reads my books. So I'm guessing he's, you know, not particularly young. So he said, hi, Rachel, just wanted to thank you for getting me back into reading novels again. My daughter recently gave me a copy of Something to Talk About, and being of a romance Hallmark kind of guy, I read it. First novel I've read in years that I can remember. He usually watches TV, the romance channel, he said. Happily, my daughter, who is a fan of your book, provided me with Mandrow, which I'm about to start reading. So in closing, thank you for reinvigorating my reading of novels. And I you know, he's not the only one. It is such a lovely email, but, you know, it's you get emails like this from women, but, you know, it's still sort of, oh, but it's a man. But there are so many men who read romance novels, and, you know, obviously I think the majority of people are women, but there's definitely plenty of men out there that do, and yeah, people would not necessarily suspect that.
You tackle a lot of quite serious issues in your books. I mean, just thinking about your latest book and its predecessor, Talk of the Town, you know, you've got a character who's been to prison and is trying to rebuild her life. You've got someone who suffered a very serious illness and has a disability as a result of that. You talk about the challenges of being a farmer, and Australians are very aware of that. So how do you pick these topics, or do they kind of choose you?
They do definitely kind of choose me. I'm an amputee, and so she appeared a couple of years ago, inspired by a friend of mine. So that one was kind of a little bit different, but other times, like I think, you know, often the characters will come first and the kind of setting, but it's not quite there. You haven't got what their major issue kind of is, or what's going on in the town. I remember in my Outback Bunyip Bay series, I wrote a book, Outback Sisters, and there's an exploration in that of wind farming, which I knew nothing about, but I was like, it needs something else. It needs kind of some kind of not issue, but something that's causing conflict in the town between these two brothers. And so I kind of, you know, went on a few farming sites and just wind farming came up. So that was, I actually went looking for the issue, but often they will just sort of come as you're writing the story, or they'll be, you know, there beforehand. Like with Meg from Talk of the Town, who you mentioned, who does have a criminal background. I didn't necessarily mean to explore the things that I explored through with her, but her character had a secret. And I remember that story was sparked completely by me running, my brief liaison with running. I was running one morning and I went past the house of somebody who I know who did go to jail in her late teens for armed robbery. And if you met her now, you would never imagine that would have happened. And I remember just thinking, this line came into my head, because I was also thinking about, I wanted to write a story set in a ghost town kind of thing, because I liked that idea. And so this line came into my head. It was something like, she had plenty of skeletons in her closet. She could deal with a few ghosts. And the line just came into my head. I was passing this woman's house and I thought, her skeletons are that she has a criminal record. She's quite open about it, but what would it be? So, you know, things kind of just come along. I know a couple of years ago, someone said, oh, it was mostly about my real romances. Oh, you're a real issue-based writer. And I would never, you know, I think of Jodie Picot maybe as an issue-based writer. I would never have thought of that. So, you know, they just sort of come along with the characters in the story. I guess in the women's fiction, you maybe think about them first a little bit more, because there really does often have to be, you know, something like a deep sort of theme that could be discussed at book clubs and things like that. But even then, they're pretty organic to me. And I always stress, I know with my crypt partners, with the book that I wrote, not last one, but the one before, Just One Wish, I remember writing it and saying, oh my gosh, there's nothing, this book is about nothing, there's no issues, like I don't know what, and yet when I did book clubs and talks about it, they're like, okay, you've explored feminism, you've explored later in life lesbianism, you've, you know, explored parenting, you know, kids when you're separated, you know, and I was like, oh, so, you know, it's not something I think about, but it kind of, I think, naturally comes in most fiction. And that's something that really annoys me about what people believe about romance. They often think, oh, it's just light and fluffy and it's just about two people falling in love. And I think I've probably read a handful of romance novels in my life where literally that's all it's about. The majority of romance books explore deep issues just as much as any other genre of fiction.
I agree 100% with that. And I think it's because romance is about, you know, it's an emotional journey. And so that involves sort of confronting your life and looking at whether you're happy with it or not. And that brings up a lot of stuff.
Exactly.
Now, I wanted to ask you, am I right in saying that your first published book was One Perfect Night?
Yeah, you are. You've done your research well.
So, and that was published by Carina Press, which is...
Yeah, I call it Milk and Boone Reject.
And so tell us about the call when you heard back that they wanted to publish it. So.
Well, because I'd been writing for 15 years, I think, by that time, and I was kind of at the point where I was like, oh, I'm just going to give up. I'd come runner-up in 2008, I think it was, in a Mills and Boone Feel the Heat contest. The winner got published. That was Lucy King that year, I think, and Jackie Ashenden and I both drew runner-up, and we both got to work with an editor for a year. It turned into 2 years. Neither of us ended up with a publishing deal at the end of it. We were both kind of politely told, if you really want to pursue this, just send it back to the submission part. So it felt like, you know, getting so close, and then just, no, I went through so many revisions with Mills and Boone with a couple of books, and I changed so many things, but I just kept falling between the sexy line at the time and the sweet line, and I just couldn't seem to, you know, get where they wanted. And then Carina Press opened, and it was a digital imprint that said where no great story goes untold. And it was basically, previously, you know, Mills and Boone could only had specific imprints and you had to hit certain notes for each one of those. Whereas with digital publishing, they're like, anything goes. So I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to give up I'm going to give up this dream. I've had enough. And at the time, I thought I'm just going to send my Mills and Boon rejects, as I call them. There was 2 of them. I sent the first one to Carina Press. I thought, I actually put in, so when I'd been working with the editor of Mills and Boon, they asked me, it was a Christmas story, and it was a Boston employee story. There was a lot of secondary characters because I like, and about family. And they asked me to take out the family and secondary characters. They told me, can we make it not a Boston employee, and can we get rid of Christmas? They said, because apparently debut novels never sell at Christmas. I wasn't sure. Since then, I don't think that's right. But that's what they told me. So anyway, I did what they wanted and still got rejected. And then so when Carina Press came out, I sort of thought, you know what, I'm just going to send the original version back. So I put everything back in and I sent it off. And then it was April Fool's Day 2011 that Angela James, who was then senior editor at Carina Press, emailed me and said, we want to buy your book. And I absolutely couldn't believe it. And I remember emailing a few writing friends and them saying, great. And someone said, are you sure it's not an April Fool's joke? So I was lucky that it wasn't. But yeah, I was really ready to give up then. And I think so many people do sort of just seem to, finally get somewhere just before they're ready to give up. Whether I could have given up or not, I don't know. So I was writing Jilted at the time that I was submitting The One Perfect Night, because I'd said I was going to give up. But some rural romance writer friends of mine, Catherine Hine and Fiona Palmer, both said to me, why are you trying to write for Mills and Boon and jumping through all these hoops? Well, you live in a small rural community, write a rural romance. And I felt a little bit like a fraud because I wasn't a farmer. I wasn't married to a farmer. But I thought, I'm just going to give this one last attempt and I'm going to focus on the community. So as it happens, I had 15 years of nothing and trying all this stuff. Then suddenly, probably, I think April Fool's Day, I got the call or the email from Carina Press, and I'd already started submitting, Jilted by then, and it was in August that year that I got an offer from Harlequin Australia for Jilted. So it was nothing for 15 years, and then it's been quite good since then.
Oh, well, that's a very inspiring story. Then I wanted to talk, and I guess maybe this goes back to why you love to write rural romance, but you're also very supportive of your community in terms of the writing and reading communities. So I know you're very involved in the sort of WA Writers Network, and also you run a wonderful online readers club together with Lisa Ireland and Sally Hepworth called The Secret Life of Authors. So what was the inspiration behind that?
Well, I think so. I run the Secret Life of, do Secret Life of Authors with Lisa, which was, and Sally, which was more the fact that we always talked about, things that, reviews, kind of book sales where we get money, stuff that we thought, readers don't actually necessarily know a lot about how the publishing world works. People will often ask us, where's the best place to buy a book to support you, which is really great, but it makes you aware that people don't necessarily know how the publishing industry works and how authors get paid. Everyone thinks authors are really rolling in money, don't we wish? And so we thought we'd just get a community. That was one aspect where we wanted to just talk about sort of things like that, but also the fact that all of us hated writing our newsletter, it seemed like, and we thought, why don't we just do it together and be much more fun? So that's how that came about. I also run, I've got an online book club for Rachael Johns' online book club, which I do with Anthea Hodgson and a book reviewer, Bree, from One Girl Too Many Books. And that's got almost 3,000 people in there now. So that's fantastic. And we do only do Australian fiction. So it's not solely a romance book club, but a lot of that, a lot of the authors books that we do end up having quite a lot of romance in them. Yeah. And so I guess it's just a matter of, the reason I did all that, a lot of what I do, to be honest, it is because I have copied somebody else. Like our Secret Life of Authors stuff was copied kind of by, we'd seen Leanne Moriarty, Burr Carroll and Di Blacklock would do a group newsletter. We thought that worked quite well. A lot of stuff that I've seen on Facebook, I do on Facebook or Instagram, it's because I follow a lot of American authors, and over the years, I've seen what works for them and have, tried to put that in my Australian setting, I suppose.
And that was another question, actually, that Jeannie asked. She wanted to know if promoting your books takes time away from your writing time, or how you manage that balance.
It definitely does, and I think that's possibly why in the last few years, well, there's been family stuff we've moved going as well. But in the very early days, when I first got published, Facebook was a thing. Instagram, I don't think was, but it wasn't what it is now. And running a Facebook page, an Instagram page, replying to readers, all that stuff takes time. I enjoy doing it, but it does take away from the time you could be writing. But it's also good because it's like, if I don't feel like being productive in my writing, well, I can do this stuff and it feels like I'm actually working towards, working. But, but it definitely does. And I think also, like, these days I often do, author events face-to-face at libraries and things like that. And I'm hopeless. If I do anything in the morning, that's me gone for a whole day. That's exhausting me. And every year probably I'll do a bit of an author tour for a couple of weeks at the end of the year. And so that takes a big chunk of writing. So that's possibly why I've slowed down a bit in the last few years in actual output. So it does take time. And I think today it takes a lot more time. Like, 20 years ago, authors had very little interaction with readers. If a reader wanted to talk to you, they would have to send a letter to your publisher, and then the publisher would read it and then decide whether they were going to forward it on or not. So, that's a big barrier. Whereas these days, if there's a mistake in your book, the reader will be on Facebook telling you about that. And so, it takes time to reply to all these things. So it is part of the job that not everyone likes. I don't mind it, but it's time consuming. Yeah.
Okay, so I guess my next question is, what are the best and worst aspects of being an author?
Oh, golly. I had thinking about this today, actually, for some reason. The worst aspect is by far for me the fear and the doubt that I live with daily. When I do these things, I'm also very happy, and when I'm on Facebook, I'm so happy, but going to the times where I'm like banging my head against the keyboard thinking this is the worst book I've ever written. And I think that invariably every single book, and the rest are a fluke, and what if I can't finish this? And I think it's a fear, a doubt that a lot of people live with, and it's a horror, writers have it. And you kind of, it's like you just had to feel the fear and do it anyway. But I don't like it. I wish that I thought all my stuff was wonderful and brilliant, and I was sitting there going, that's a great line. Just right. I feel like that would be a lot nicer. My day-to-day world would be less anxiety, and my blood pressure would probably be better. So the worst part is definitely for me the doubt and the fear that I'm going to put something out that's terrible, or I'm going to not be able to finish a book. That's kind of a fear. And I mean, it's a stupid fear, because if I step back and I say, look at someone else, what's the worst thing that could happen if I put a book out that, people don't like? It's not the end of the world, really, and most people will give authors the benefit of the doubt for a few books and stuff. So, and readers, I feel, are also a lot more generous than writers as readers. I talk with people who are just readers, and they read a book totally different to writers. And yet when I talk about writing friends with books, and we'll tear it apart and go, oh my gosh, why did that happen? But I need to remember the majority of readers are just there for the ride and to enjoy it, and so they're not going to be as critical as you are in yourself. So definitely the worst part is the doubt, and the stress when you're close to a deadline and you're not sure that you're going to be able to get it done. The best part is probably there's so many good parts, and I don't deny that I have I'm lucky to have a great job most of the time. The good parts are the people I've met, the writer friends that I've made. I like interacting with the readers. Best part is getting a new cover. So the highs, I think the highs definitely outweigh the lows, or we wouldn't do it because the lows can be pretty bad. Yeah.
True. Now, what is the weirdest thing on your desk in your writing space?
The weirdest thing. Okay. I think the weirdest thing, I don't know if it's weird, I've got so much mess on my desk. I've got books, I've got Coke cans, I've got lipstick, pens, photos. I've got this thing, which is probably quite weird, but only because it fell off my shelf. This is a unicorn cat.
Oh, that's gorgeous.
Emma bought. I bought it at market in Bustleton a few years ago. So it's a unicorn cat. I love cats, and it was bright and colourful. I just thought I had to have it. So my husband thinks that's ridiculous. So that is on my desk at the moment. That might actually take the cake as the most. Was that ridiculous? Is that what you said?
Weirdest.
Weirdest. That might take it. I've also got this, which I haven't used yet. It's a hoodie for a bottle of wine. You can buy them in Kmart.
Right.
Yeah, I bought one for my friend Anthea, who we do book club with, and we were supposed to, so the idea is that whenever we go to each other's house, we take turns doing book club at different houses. We will take the wine to whoever's house we're going to, and that we could take it in this hoodie. So it's a wine hoodie, and it's pink because I love pink.
Those are two good examples. Some nice, fun, creative things. Now, I know that you are a podcast addict. So can you recommend a couple of your favorite podcasts?
I haven't been listening to as many lately because I got, there's an app that I downloaded a couple of years ago with a friend, writing friends, called Voxer, which is a voice message app. So whenever I go on walks now, I end up voice messaging and talking to all these writers instead. But I do love, I love Rights for Women, the podcast by Pamela Cook and Kel Butler, I think it is. Especially lately, they've been very supportive of authors launching books during these tough COVID restricted times. So I like their podcast. I have a love-hate relationship with book podcasts because part of me loves listening to Booktopia, Better Reading, the So You Think You Can Write podcast. I'm sure there's a few others apart from the Rights for Women I haven't mentioned. So I have a love-hate relationship with writing and book podcasts because I love listening to other authors' processes in one way, but then I also listen to them and think, oh my gosh, I should be doing it that way. Why aren't I better? I should be writing 10,000 words a day instead of 2,000, or I should be plotting rather than. And so it kind of plays with my anxiety. The other I found a podcast recently which is quite fast. It's very weird how I found it, but it's a domain, the real estate podcast. I've forgotten what it's called, but it's run. Actually, I'll find out for you. It's on my podcast app, and it is about people. It's called Somewhere Else, and it's just about a whole load of different. It started. Whoops, stop. It's about people's different experiences in moving. So it's got about gap years. It's got traveling and living on the road. It's got moving to a tree house, or all the different types. So as a writer, I like listening to things like that because you're always hoping for inspiration. So yeah, I've also listened. A podcast also great for research. A book that I'm going to be writing reasonably soon is a little bit about multi-level marketing and party plan type things, like people selling makeup in pyramid selling type thing. And so I've been listening to quite a few podcasts that explore that format of business.
Okay, that's a really interesting idea. I hadn't thought about using podcasts for research. So yeah, really great idea. Now, let's talk about your most recent release, Something to Talk About. You can perhaps, just for anyone who hasn't read it yet, you can perhaps give a bit of background. I love the banter in it. I love the characters. And I felt a little bit like when it opened that there was, it had a bit of a nostalgic feel to it, maybe for small towns that are probably gradually dying, as the world changes.
Yes, I think the hero is a city teacher, and he comes into a small town to move to work, and I think he notices the things that if you live in a small town you just take for granted, but the fact that there's a different variety of shops. Some of them close they close earlier on the Saturday. There's a strip mall. So he definitely notices the things that you see in a small town that you might not necessarily see, when you go shopping in the city. Something to Talk About is a linked book to Talk of the Town. It's the heroine from Something to Talk About appeared in Talk of the Town, and she is an amputee, as I mentioned earlier. So she was inspired by a friend of mine who lost her arm in her late teens. I met her long after this, and I always thought she was such an amazing person. She could do so much more than most people can do with 2 arms. She can knit, she rides a motorbike, she can cover books, because we were at the library together. So I always wanted to write a story about Tabitha. And so the story is Tabitha, who is an amputee and has been unlucky in love living in a small town. It's not always easy finding love in a small town. I think you either often find it quite early, or you feel like you missed the boat, because, you know, there's a lot smaller pool of potential partners. So Tabitha feels like she's kind of missed the boat, even though she's only 26, but she feels like she's one of the guys, you know, everyone's best friend rather than the person that they look upon as a potential girlfriend. So she's decided at the beginning of the book to have a baby by herself, because she's really keen on that. So she is pregnant through donor sperm when the book starts, and the teacher who comes to town, I really wanted to play with so a friend of mine said a few years ago, you've never written about a teacher that comes to town, whereas every second women especially actually, in small towns, were either a nurse or a teacher, it seemed, when I lived there, because they had come for a stint when they were young, just for a 1-year contract or something, met a farmer and you know, never left. And so she's like, I haven't written about this before. So I decided I wanted to do that, but I thought I'd do a male teacher rather than a female. And so I had a lot of fun with the kind of a male coming to town, new blood, all the single women kind of going a bit crazy, and the heroine be the only person who was not on the market or not trying to hook her claws into him, and warning him off, and him kind of, so that they meet when she's warning him off and trying to do him a favour, saying, look, hey, no, you're welcome to small town, just be careful, because all the single women are after you, and they get off on the wrong foot because of that. So that was a lot of fun, playing with him sort of not realising how sought after he was as well. And he obviously doesn't want a relationship because it's a romance. He's had a bad, you know, thing he's just emerged from, and he just wants to lay low and look at, you know, recover for a while. Sorry, I'm terrible at that one-line pitch thing.
That was a lovely description. I thought that was great. And you have another book out in November, Flying the Nest. What can you tell us about that?
Okay, I'm wearing my this is a little beach shack earrings. So Flying the Nest is about a woman who thinks she's in a reasonable, you know, okay, a pretty good relationship, but, you know, she's middle-aged, she's got kids that are at school, you know, it's busy. So, you know, she's probably not giving much attention to her relationship either as a husband, but, you know, she thinks it's all fine. And then he announces that he wants to try nest parenting. And nest parenting was my idea, like that's where the idea for this book came. I read a couple of years ago about what nest parenting is. I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's when, for anyone who hasn't, a couple separates, but the children stay in the home, and the husband and the father and the mum take turns coming and living in the house with the children, rather than what so often happens, the children going between the two places. And I thought, oh, I've got to write a book about that. So poor Ashley, my character, this book begins with her husband saying to her, I think we should try nest parenting. That's his way of telling her he wants to split up, and that's the first time she realises. So it's a story of how they navigate that, but it's actually it's a very romantic story, and I won't say who she ends up with, whether it's the husband or another love interest. But yeah, for my women's fiction, it's probably the most romance-centred women's fiction, and it's also quite rural, because my character, in the week where she's not living with her kids, she ends up living in a small town a couple of hours away, and it's a coastal lobster fishing community. And so it's kind of my idea as well about, apart from the nest parenting, was, you know, as women, as mothers, we're often, not just mothers, but women, we often, you know, put everyone else's needs and happiness before our own. And so it's kind of about her having to choose in the end between the two places, between the city and the country. The city is where finding her feet and her new love. And in the end, she's got to choose one or the other. And that's a terrible decision for a woman to have to make between her love and her children, her own happiness and her children's happiness. So that was kind of the idea I wanted to explore.
I said, always tackle the big issues. Since we're almost out of time, could I ask you to hold up your treasure hunt code for our readers?
It's that, can you see it there?
Yes, perfect.
No, because when I'm holding it up, I can't see.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Enough?
And Rachel, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Laura. I love talking to you as well. So thank you.